Ever wanted to capture those smooth, silky water shots or streaky clouds without an ND filter? The good news is, you don't actually need one. In this video, I'm going to show you how to pull off beautiful, long exposures with just your camera.
You don't need an ND filter, you don't need a tripod.
Let's jump into it.
Alright, so I've just arrived on the beach, ready to get set up. The sun's going to set kind of soon. It's a bit of a gloomy day, so I don't know how this photo is going to come out in terms of lighting and things like that, but nonetheless, I still want to show you this method. Now, this method does use Photoshop or similar software. We'll be taking a bunch of images and stacking them together. It's called image stacking, so you will need a way to do that. And the thing I love most about this method is you don't need an ND filter. Even though I own one, there's plenty of times where I'm just walking around, I don't have all my equipment, and I really can't be bothered putting an ND filter on. So if it's a shot that I really want and I think is going to be a real keeper that I'm going to love, I'll usually get the ND filter out because you don't really know what the photo is going to look like until you've stacked it in Photoshop. That is the risk with this method, but to be honest, 95% of the time, I'm very happy with the results I get from this, and it looks pretty much identical to an ND filter when it does work right. Another thing I love about this is you don't need a tripod. Obviously, when you're shooting long exposures with an ND filter, you really need a tripod because you're usually dealing with shutter speeds that are 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, so on, whatever it is you choose to do. But with this method, as long as you've got enough light or you bump your ISO up, depends on your camera and stabilization and things like that. For the most part, you can shoot these handheld, which is awesome because, as I said, you might just be running, gutting, shooting a whole bunch of photos and you don't want to get all your equipment out. So anyway, that is about it. Let's get set up somewhere and I'll explain what I'm doing and then I'll show you the editing side as well. So let's go. I thought this might make a nice foreground element, but there might be something better. All right, so I think I'll set myself somewhere up here. That's another reason I love this method. I've still got my backpack on. My camera's just on my clip here. I can just pull it off and do this method without having to need a tripod, dial my composition in with the tripod and put the filter on and all that type of thing. So yeah, all I do, it's very, very simple. I'm not really going to talk about camera settings so much here because actually I won't talk about them at all. I've taken a few photos already throughout the day and I'll choose which one I decide to edit. So I'll tell you the camera settings once we're editing the actual photos. But for the most part, you just want a fast enough shutter speed you can handheld. So on this camera, I'm comfortable going down to about 1/15th, sometimes 1/5. But I probably wouldn't do that with this method because we're taking a burst lot of photos. It's going to be hard to kind of hold the camera still for the amount of time we're doing. Now, all I'm going to do here is set my camera to burst mode. If your camera doesn't have burst mode, which most do, you can just press the shutter one after the other and just take 20 photos is usually enough. I usually take 20 to 40 just in case. If it's slower moving water, then you want more photos. If it's fast moving water, then you can get away with less photos. There's some stacks I've done at like rough beaches where I've only used about 5 images to get this effect. And then there's been still lakes where I've stacked probably 25 to 30 images to get the long exposure effect. So, like I said, I'm on burst mode here. I'm just going to point my camera up, dial my composition in, and shoot away. Just like that, and I roughly count 20 something images, whatever it is. And as I said, the great thing about this method is even if you should be taking more images than you need, because even if you only take 40 images, if you take 40 images, you might only use 5 or 10 of them. It just depends when you do process it through Photoshop. If it's a little too much on the effect, where you're getting like white wispy kind of water that looks like steam, then you may want to dial back on the amount of images used. But that is really about it. It's very, very simple. You don't need an ND filter, you don't need a tripod. And like I said, it's fantastic when you're just walking around and you see an opportunity where a long exposure would work. Now, for those who don't know, long exposures are best when there's water, something where you want to portray some movement. So usually water, and sometimes you can get some movement in the clouds if they're moving fast enough as well. So that is about it. I'll see you in Photoshop, or Lightroom first, where we give these a really quick edit, and into Photoshop where we complete the stack. So I'll see you there.
All right, hello and welcome to the editing portion of this video. Now, I'm going to show you some images that I took. We're just in Lightroom here. And I'll just go to unrated. I took a lot of images throughout the day, but I did choose my favorite composition. Remember what I said when I took the photos during the video? That's why I didn't share my camera settings, because I may end up using a different composition, which I did. So what I've done is just rated some images 2 stars. And these here are all the same composition, and they're just basically me holding my shutter down, and I got 40 images in the end here. So I didn't plan for that, I just held my shutter down, but it ended up being a perfect 40. But we're not going to be using all of these. If you remember while we were filming, I said If the water's very, very rough or fast moving, you don't need as many images to stack because a lot happens in a short amount of time. Whereas if it's a pretty calm lake with just some ripples and you're trying to do the same effect, you can use a lot less images. You'll need a lot more images because a lot less happens in the same amount of time, if that makes sense. So basically, the rougher the water, the less images you need. So that's why with this, I did take 40 knowing I wouldn't be using that many. But what I've already done, I've already stacked a few of these different sets. So I'll stack 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, just to see which one I like best. Usually with long exposures, I prefer to start taking the photos when the water is receding. But funnily enough, in this instance, the set that looks best is where the water was coming in, which is 0 to 10. Another thing I like best is you can see with some of these later images, a lot of these rocks here further into the background, they are a little bit covered by the water, and I want to see more of those personally. Although we can do some blending between different images and things like that, I want to keep this as simple as possible for this video. So we're going to be working with the first 10, which is just these ones up until here, with these first 10 here. So what we're going to do first, as I said, we are in Lightroom. We need to give these a really, really quick edit. Nothing final, but just a quick edit in terms of the exposure, some of the color, saturation, and things like that, just to make them look half decent. And then once we've stacked them, we'll come back to Lightroom where we'll finish these off. So what I'm going to start with here, I normally do this, you don't have to do this. It depends on your camera, the profile, whether you like the look of it. I change a profile to Adobe Landscape. It just makes the colors a little bit more vivid in my opinion. And what I often do as well is just press auto to see what Lightroom wants to do with the exposure and some of the other settings, and usually it gets you somewhere in the ballpark. So I've just done that. That looks okay, but we'll make some further edits here. I really want to warm this up. I feel like it's too cold. So I'm going to pull my temperature up just a little bit, maybe somewhere there. And also probably want to drop the highlights a little more and maybe lift the shadows up a little bit more as well. Vibrance and saturation, I might lift the saturation up just a tiny bit as well. Not too much, maybe somewhere there. Maybe somewhere there. Now that's a really good start to start our stack. As I said, this isn't any final editing. This is just so we can prepare the images for the stack, make sure the color balance matches between them, make sure the exposure matches and things like that. Now it should match if you shot in manual, although I use auto white balance, and although my camera does a great job of usually keeping the white balance the same throughout a burst mode shot, I do check to make sure that the white balance is matched across, which we don't have to worry about because it's going to happen with what we do next. Before I do that though, I just want to talk about my camera settings. As I said when I was shooting the video, I didn't share any of my settings because I wasn't sure which set of images I was going to go ahead with editing. So with this one, it's ISO 100, 28 millimeters. So that's the widest my focal length was with that particular lens. I shot this at f8 because I wanted to get most things in focus throughout the scene. As you can see, the foreground's sharp enough, the midground's pretty sharp, and the background is sharp enough. It's so far away, I don't really care if that was in focus or not. It's a very, very small part of the image, so I wasn't too concerned. I could have focus stacked this, could have gone to f11 or f16, but I like the way this looks, so that's why I chose f8. And 1/60th of a second, so more than enough, more than fine for shooting handheld. Yeah, that's about it in terms of settings. So let's get these ready to go. So with the first one selected, with the one we made the edits to, I'm just going to hold down shift on my keyboard and then click number 10, and that should select all of the images from 1 to 10. And then what we can do is just click sync here, and I'm going to press check all, which this is now going to sync all those settings we made to the first image to all 10 here. And once that's done, with them still selected, we can right click that, come up to edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Alright, so now our 10 images are loaded up into Photoshop as separate layers, as you can see in the layers panel here. What we want to do, select the first one just by clicking on it, and hold down shift and click the last one. That'll make sure they're all selected. We're going to come up to edit and auto align layers. Just leave that on auto and we'll press OK. Now this may take a while depending on how many images you have and how big they are. The reason we're doing this is because we did shoot these handheld, so there is a chance that some of the images might be moved left, right, up or down and things like that. So Photoshop is going to move those around to make sure they're stacked on top of each other perfectly. As I said, this could take a while, depends on how many images you have and how large they are. Even if I shoot on a tripod, I still do this because there's often little tremors and little movements and things like that. So I do this no matter what, whether I shoot on a tripod or not, but because we shoot handheld, it's extremely important that we don't miss this step. Alright, so now that is finished, and what you can see is on the edges of our image here, you can see some of the canvas, the checkerboard pattern. That just means that Photoshop's had to move the images around quite a bit, so there is basically some edges. We'll crop those out later, so it's no big deal. With these all still selected, we're now going to come up to Layer, Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. All this does is put all those images or layers into one little stack, which is just completed then. And then we can come back up to Layer, back to Smart Objects, down to Stack Mode, and we'll change that to Median. Now what this is going to do is stack the images together and give us our long exposure effect by basically blending the images. All right, and that is now complete. As you can see, we have the long exposure effect. It looks great. And what we're going to do before we continue is just right click on the layer here or on the smart object, and we're going to flatten the image. The reason being is if you don't do that, you're basically trying to save a file that has 10 layers in it, 10 images, and it's going to be a large file. If you flatten the image, it'll flatten everything into one single image, and it will just be a lot easier to work with in Lightroom. And sometimes Photoshop won't save files if they're too big. So that's an important step. What we're going to do now is just grab the crop tool, and you can see these black edges. That's where the layers have had to move to align. And we're going to grab the corner here, hold down Shift and click on the corner, and then press Alt or Option if you're on a Mac, and that'll allow us to crop the image and keep the same aspect ratio. As you can see, the rectangle stays the same, not the same size, but it stays the same ratio, which is important. So I just want to crop this in just a tiny amount, somewhere there, just to get rid of any of those weird edges where the layers had to align. And that's about it. Now what we're going to do is press Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac, or come up to File and Save, and that will save back to Lightroom where we can finish our final edits on this image. Okay, so here we are back in Lightroom. This is our final image though. We are going to give it some editing, but if you look at the before and after, this is basically one frame from our shots, and this is the long exposure effect. So you can see it works fairly well. We could have probably done more images, but it was rough water, and I don't want it to be just artifacts and white frothiness everywhere. So I think this has come out pretty good. Now, in terms of editing this, what I want to do is probably just start with some masking. I noticed actually today or yesterday that Lightroom has introduced some new features called landscape, and it can actually pick parts out of a landscape for you to mask. I normally just do that with a brush, but that's an awesome tool so far. What I want to do, we'll actually click the sky first, and I just want to play around with the sky just a little bit. I'm going to get through this very quickly because this isn't really the point of this video. I'm going to increase the saturation of the sky and potentially the texture as well, and some dehaze there. Oop, that's too much. And maybe just try to play around with the clarity a little bit. I think that looks good. As I said, this isn't going to be a full editing tutorial. I'm just going to get through this fairly quickly because the point of this video is to show you how to do the long exposures without an ND filter. But I'll do this edit very, very quickly. Let's also create a new mask, and we'll try the landscape feature, see how that works. It's going to detect the landscape features, as you can see, and it's found sky, mountains, and water, and it's done a pretty good job of those masks. Let's do a mountain mask. As I said, normally I'll do this with a brush manually, but this tool is just making things a lot faster. And what I want to do with these rocks here is just increase the color temperature. This is how they looked in real life, a little bit more warm. And maybe, I don't know about the saturation, maybe a tiny bit. And I want to increase the texture on these rocks as well because they look really nice. Something like that, fairly simple. Let's create a new mask. We'll do the landscape one once again, and I want to select the water. Again, normally I just use a brush when I do this. And I just want to lower the color temperature to make it a bit more blue. Something like that. And then this time I'm going to create a new mask with a brush. And just brush kind of like a U, a horseshoe shape, I should say, just around the bottom here. Create like a little bit of a vignette. I'm going to lower the exposure on that just a little bit, just to take the eye away from the foreground. Something like that. And I'll create a new mask with a linear gradient coming down from the sky. And we'll lower the exposure on that as well. The point of this is to try and bring the eye into the main focus of the image, which is kind of the water and this central area here. And I think that's done a good job of doing that. So that's about it, I think. I'm fairly happy with that. I might lift the exposure of the whole image overall. I'll have a bit of a play around with it. But again, this isn't really supposed to be a full editing tutorial. It's just how to show you how to stack those images without an ND filter or without a tripod. And I think it's worked out really well. Again, this probably wasn't the best image to show you this with. It's not as obvious, the effect's not as obvious as I would have liked, but I've done this plenty of times. It works absolutely fantastic. Hope you enjoyed. So if you want to learn a whole lot more about photography and editing, including techniques just like this, I'll leave some links in the description below to my courses. If you're interested, check those out. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like if it helped you, share a comment below if you have any questions or anything like that. And yeah, please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.